Sure, well, let me talk about my mask.
Sure. Come a
little
closer.
Step closer to the microphone. Thank you, sir.
Well, folks, you may notice I'm wearing a new mask today. This mask was given to me by a Calgary mom, Estella Delayoan Pinyak, for her daughter, who has a hearing disability. 5% of people in the world are deaf or hard of hearing, and one of the challenges we've had over this time that we've all been wearing masks, even for me, sometimes it's harder to understand people when you can't see their lips move. And so this is a made in Canada mask. You can learn more about it at C2 Here Canada, C2 Here. And the point is that it allows people who are deaf and hard of hearing to see your lips move, and it also lets everyone see your smile. And I know everyone's been missing my smile. So I think that this is something that I will try to use a little more. And you can learn more at c2here.ca. SE, like C2 Here.
Well, so just on that quickly though, this is a big issue for some people because you don't realize how much you actually read people's lips until this thing happened. And then you can actually, you subconsciously read people's lips.
Sure, even for me, you know, I often have to say, oh, could you repeat yourself, please, when I'm talking to someone wearing a mask. Imagine how much more difficult that is for someone who is deaf or hard of hearing. And so it's taken me a long time to get to this point, but I hope that I'll be able to make it a little easier for people to follow from here on in.
Speaking of masks, in a week's time, Council's going to meet to discuss. There's been a few things that have happened since the debate. Transit now has masks. Some other cities have voted for, some have voted against. Lethbridge against, Edmonton for. And we've had another week of numbers, or part of the week of numbers.
No numbers on Friday.
That's why. So I'll only say a few more days of numbers. Where do you see council sitting as of now? Now I know you're not going to tell us what just tell us where you think we're at now.
Well, I'm really not sure, because we are waiting for a couple more weeks of data, and we've had some little data. I will tell you, I'm very happy that we seem to be crushing. The numbers are looking really good. I'm happy that the government provided some clarification on transit, on shared ride facilities, and on long-term care centers and hospitals. They hadn't done that when council originally was debating this, and that was one of the things that even the members of council that wanted to lift the bylaw didn't want to lift it on transit and in taxis. So that's super helpful. I think one area that we still need to talk about is children. Remember that there are about 300 or 400,000 children in the city who are not eligible for vaccination. And you don't want the Delta variant to run rampant through that group. And so one of the questions we should be asking ourselves is, what are we going to do about areas where there are lots of children, like day camps and rec facilities and other city facilities? I think most of our partners, for example, the Y Open today, have announced that they're going to keep masking in place in their facilities. And so we want to give a little bit of guidance on that, because we've heard from a lot of businesses. In some ways, they prefer having the masks bylaw in place because it makes it easier for them to enforce within their own business. But at the same time, they want to make sure that they're not outliers if they choose to go one way or the other. So they're really looking to us for guidance. So ultimately, we'll look at the data and we'll make a decision. I will tell you one thing is very troubling, and that is what has happened in Israel. Israel has the highest second dose vaccination rates in the world. And they took a moderate approach in terms of removing a lot of restrictions, but they left the mask mandate in place for quite a long time and lifted it just at the beginning of June, and now it's back. It only lasted 2 weeks or so because the Delta variant is something they're very concerned about, and the last thing we want to do is go backwards. And I would really prefer to never go backwards, just like the Premier says. And so as I've been saying, if you have a fire and there's still some burning embers underground, you want to make sure you put those out before they flare up. And a few more days of this might help us with that.
But some people have asked me, what would you have to see by July 5th to cast a yes vote on repealing or deactivating, as Edmonton did, the mask bylaw? What is it that you aren't seeing now that you would have to see by then?
When we had the debate last week, the Delta variant was still doubling every 10 days, which is the highest doubling rate we've seen of any variant. So what I'm really looking very specifically at is that doubling rate and making sure that lengthens, because it's exponential, right? I was really surprised to hear Dr. Corriveau say, it's doubling really quickly, but the numbers are small, so we're not worried. And I was like, well, no, that's not how exponential growth works. Because as I've been saying for a year, if you got bacteria in a petri dish that doubles every minute, and at 10 minutes the petri dish is overflowing, it was only half full at 9 minutes. And so we want to make sure that we're watching that, and we want to make sure that we're keeping up really well with those second dose numbers. We're doing great, but we want to make sure those numbers continue, because ultimately we know that the Delta variant is resistant to only one dose. We really need people to get their second dose. So I would love to see that number getting closer to, say, 50% by the time we make the debate, which is not impossible.
On today's topic,
Yes.
in hearing from other cities, how do you think Calgary's comparing this?
Well, we deliberately picked cities and asked them to speak about areas where they were way ahead. And so it may feel like Calgary is way behind on these three issues, but in fact, we're pretty far ahead on other issues. And so this afternoon, we're going to hear from a lot of our city staff about what we have been doing. But in terms of really collecting diversity-based data to help us make our decisions, we're just at the beginning of that journey. We are starting to look at things through a gender and equity lens when we're making decisions about things like transit, but we haven't gone as far as Edmonton has yet. And we're still a little shy to talk about concepts like racial justice in Calgary, so we've got some work to do yet on that anti-racism journey.
I know it sounds painfully obvious, but why is it an important conversation now?
It's important because for many, many years, Calgary has been investing inequitably in different neighborhoods. But also, we don't always think about the impact of the decisions we make in this building on people who experience life in a very different way. So our decisions on transit are really based on people who come downtown in the morning and go home in the evening. They're not based on shift workers who take the train at 10 o'clock at night. There's a lot of research being done that says simple things like how we create walkability in neighborhoods is really designed for men of a certain height. And for women or someone pushing a stroller or someone in a wheelchair, often what we think is super walkable is not. So I'll give you a little example. I went for a walk during Chinook class this winter, and I got to the intersection of 3rd Street and 4th Avenue Southwest. And I happened to be with a friend who uses a mobility scooter. And what I realized in that corner is we must have had funding at some point, because the north half of that intersection is really good. The curb cuts are good, there's bumps, it's easy to get into the street. But the south half is really bad. And in fact, the curb cut is such that you have to swerve out into traffic if you want to cross the street. Now, who in the world thought that if you build half of an intersection for people with disabilities and not the other half, that's okay? And so those are the sorts of everyday decisions that we got to get better at.
Wonder if, I know it was mentioned early in the meeting, but wondering if you can tell us what the city is planning to do with the coyote that's running around in Tuscany.
Oh man, we have had a number of emboldened coyotes. I never thought I would use the phrase emboldened coyotes or brazen coyotes. But listen, this is actually quite dangerous. We've had 3 people who were injured enough to go to hospital over the course of the weekend. So it's clear that for that particular animal, hazing is not working. And so we're going to have to move to the next steps here. What we have to be careful about is what we've learned, what the research shows quite clearly is that if you destroy all these animals, believe it or not, it leads to more grazing behavior. The animals breed faster and they tend to be more aggressive. So you got to really have the right balance here. But clearly, our commitment here has to be to human safety. And in that neighborhood in Tuscany, there's a problem that needs to be addressed.
So there was a reference to removal. Do you know what exactly that'll mean?
I don't think it actually means send them to the farm.
Okay.
So trap and remove from the city.
Or the other thing.
Mayor, going back to the last thing, when you say the critics who say just get on with it, do what other cities have done, just open up ASAP, which in this case would be the 5th. Just do it.
You know, we may well.
But you also said you may not.
Well, we may not. And here's the thing. Nobody wants to go backwards. Nobody is saying let's keep the masks in forever and ever. But we are saying stomp out the fire before it comes back. And you know, as I said, there are certain people, you can write hi mom in your column, who have made a big deal about the difference between the province and city. The difference is 3 weeks. It's really not a big deal when you're looking at a 15-month cycle, if those 3 weeks allow us to not have to go backwards.
Speaking of phase 3, are you aware of pre-booking for outdoor pools, if that'll be removed come July 1?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can find out before our next Scrum.
Okay. And another question of the day, Calgary Catholic made a decision
Yes.
to remove the name of Bishop Grandin from their high school. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, this kind of symbolism really does matter. It may seem small, but it does matter. And my Facebook this morning, I was getting all these notifications while I was in council, full of graduates of that school who were so happy about the change. And ultimately, I'm really pleased that the Catholic School Board made the decision. They seem to have done so in the right way. They talked to elders, they got some advice, they put a temporary name in place for now until they can properly rename the school with proper ceremony. That all feels right to me. All right?
Just one heat-related question.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Are you, the city council, are you hearing anything from the community in terms of the need for any cooling centers or things like that situation?
Not yet, because I'll remind people that if your house is too warm, go somewhere cool. So shopping malls are open, a lot of city facilities, including libraries, are open, and rec centers, go somewhere cool. The issue for the cooling centers is really at night, you know, when these other areas where you can go are not available. So because the temperatures have still been manageable at night, we haven't seen the need to open 24-hour cooling centers, but we're monitoring this very carefully. And if we're seeing a challenge, particularly for seniors and vulnerable people, we won't hesitate to move.
How quickly
What
can
would be
you...
on that list?
Well, we'd probably just leave some of our rec facilities open 24/7 rather than closing them at the normal night. That's the easiest thing to do because those facilities exist.
How quickly could you stand up some temporary cooling centers?
Super fast. You know, we could probably make an announcement in the afternoon and have them ready by the evening. So we're monitoring this very carefully. Right now we don't see the need, but if the need becomes acute, especially as we get warmer temperatures over the next 48 hours, we'll move. Okay? Thanks everybody.
Thank you.